Okay, thanks. I've made 2 feature films and some short films nobody's seen, and so it's still strange to me that anyone cares what I might have to say. Yeah, but anyway, thank you very much, and thanks to BAFTA. It's truly an honor to be here. I've never lectured before, and perhaps it's just the word lecture, but it makes me anxious. I feel comfortable public speaking. The only training I have is as an actor, and my theater background makes me happy to be in front of an audience. I do feel more comfortable here than at a cocktail party. Luckily, there's cocktails, and I have one here just in case. You know, but I'm really looking forward to the conversation later because a Q&A is where I feel I thrive a little more. I almost thought about just asking myself a series of questions up here to make myself feel more comfortable, but I will spare you that strangeness. So I want to say, as you all know, the most important thing we can do as people who are trying to make creative work is to be yourself and embrace what is uniquely you and your own voice. So obviously, I'm just talking about my approach, and it's unique to the kind of strange interests that I have. And I just hope that there's some tools that you can put in your toolbox that can work with how you are you. I also want to say that as many of the other incredibly accomplished filmmakers that it's an honor to be among in this series, I'm a writer and director. So the way that I write my screenplays would be inappropriate if I weren't directing them. As an actor who recently turned down a role in one of my movies said that the screenplay was overwrought. And there is a kind of indulgence in the details of my screenplays that would be entirely foolish if I was writing for another director. There's a level of specificity in the blocking. You know, if Willem Dafoe wears his reading glasses like this, if Robert Pattinson scratches his ear like this, it may very well be in the screenplay. There's never, in my screenplay, Rome burns or they fight. You know, Arthur draws Excalibur, he thrusts towards the giant who parries, and, you know, the whole thing. So there. Okay, so that out of the way, I'll start at the beginning. Again, this feels so odd, but you know, what's the inspiration? Where do the ideas come from to write something? It depends on the script, as I'm sure you would all agree. I had an incredibly intense nightmare many years ago that led to the idea of a story. I walked around Brooklyn for 5 hours and had the structure of a screenplay that took me 6 years to write. That was terrible, but you know, I just kind of had it. Most often, I have an atmosphere, which I'll talk about a lot later, and some images that get me going. And sometimes it's something pragmatic. And very often it's a combination of a few of these things. I made a short film called Brothers that was a proof of concept to try to get The Witch financed. It had been many years since I'd made a short film, and my most recent work was a very stylized piece based on Edgar Allan Poe, which featured a puppet as a lead character and performances that were truly weird. My producer said, you know, if you want anyone to finance The Witch, you probably ought to make a new short, and it should feature naturalistic performances by children and scary woods. And so that was a task. and thus I was able to find a story that met with that pragmatic task. With The Witch, I had written many feature screenplays that no one wanted to finance, and I felt that as an American director at the time, if I wanted to get a film financed, it seemed like it needed to be in an identifiable genre. All of my sort of weirder films no one cared for. So I thought, well, it'll probably have to take place in New England because that's where I'm from, and given that it'll probably have no budget, I'll have to shoot it in like the proverbial my parents' backyard. And witches are the archetypal New England spook, and I've been interested in them, so that makes sense. So there's the pragmatic end. But then I truly, as a kid, and this sounds a little precious, but I really did imagine the fact that there were Puritans walking around who grew up in the reign of Queen Elizabeth, who were tromping around the woods behind my house, and that was and living an almost medieval existence. And you pair that with the belief in a real witch, and that was an atmosphere that really excited me. With the Lighthouse, similarly, my brother said that he was working on a ghost story in a lighthouse, and that phrase, a ghost story in a lighthouse, conjured up the images of the movie, the visual atmosphere, the crusty, musty, dusty, rusty, black and white, square aspect ratio, and then I needed to find a story that accompanied that. So anyway, all of these things really finally have to do with what I'm really interested in and what is sort of uniquely me, I think, maybe, which is my interest in ghost stories, fairy tales, folk tales, mythology, religion, sometimes the occult. That's what really gets me excited. I would rather write a novel or paint a painting that has to do with that stuff than to just make a movie. And all that really has to do with the past, which weirdly may somehow be my biggest passion. I think that there's complicated things about organized religion, but there's also complicated things about, like, in an entirely secularized society, we lose the sublime and the sacred sometimes. And so I find that what really excites me is to kind of understand where we're coming from and where we're going from where we came from, and to try to go back into the past to think about ideas that are bigger than ourselves. The genre that tends to explore that today is science fiction, which makes sense when, like, number is God in the, like, intelligentsia that we're probably all a part of. But I like to stay in the past. And what's very important to me when I begin writing a piece is to not have a message, to not have any intention beyond staying true to the world in which I'm trying to write in. But thank heavens, like, as much as I try to seal myself up like an anchorite and lock myself in my alchemical cell, the world is not, my world is not vacuum sealed. So I am affected by the zeitgeist, whether I want to be or not. And that's important because otherwise, The Witch can't just appeal to people who are alive in the 1630s, and The Lighthouse can't just appeal to people who are alive in the 1890s because there's not enough graveyard screenings for that to be profitable. So with The Witch, I'm happy that most people, though not everyone for sure, sees the film as a feminist film. If I were to be objective and stand back, I think I would agree with that stance. But that was not my intention. I just wanted to make a witch movie, as I kind of said. But that's what happened with The Lighthouse, which I don't know if people have seen. I was just trying to make a ghost story in a lighthouse. which it's finally not. But it became, when I was writing this story, this hyper-masculine story about two men with my brother, I was thinking, why are we writing this right now? This is the worst time to be writing this story. And then once we had the first draft, we realized, like, oh, I guess we're talking about toxic masculinity and like everything that's like messed up about it. So that's cool. But even still, when you're getting into this other world, you can't be judgmental of the characters and the time period. You can't rewrite history to conform to the zeitgeist, but you do have a responsibility to understand what's going on today and not be foolhardy. The thing that I'm working on currently has slavery and violence against women, and it takes place in the Viking Age, so that's going to happen. But how do I tell those stories without rewriting history responsibly? I don't, those are the questions I have to ask myself, and I can't provide easy answers. Continuing to stay quite large, a few things that I think about and struggle with is trying to find a harmonious balance of certain opposites in my writing. The largest things would be like Dionysian versus Apollonian. The sort of or I'll start with Apollonian, which is the structure, what patriarchal Western culture would call like male ideals, and then the Dionysian female mysterious stuff. Like, how do you create a balance of something that is like rigorous and structured and clear, but also has enigma and mystery and atmosphere. Moving further with these opposites, the mythic versus the naturalistic. I'm drawn to archetypal storytelling. I'm drawn to archetypal characters. How do you make them believable? It's difficult. In doing this kind of archetypal storytelling, even if it's based on a fairy tale or a myth, I still try to bring in, my personal experiences, the things that are me. When my brothers first read the Witch screenplay, they said, even though this is the 17th century, it sounds like our family arguing, and that's very important. Someone not just conveying plot, but also having little asides that are about life. Like, these kinds of things can, of course, ground it. And another thing that really helps me, which is not surprising, is knowing the space. Like, when I write, it's very helpful for me to kind of have a dollhouse and dolls and their clothing and know what's in each room. In order for me to like really imagine what's going on. And also, because I'm telling stories that take place in the past and aren't my personal experience, by creating this dollhouse in my head and with mood boards and such, like I'm able to see it clearly enough to own it. Because if I can't experience what I write as my own memories, it can't be truthful. Again, that's sort of a precious statement, but that's how I try to look at it, is taking every moment on as if this is a moment from my personal past in order to tell it. Another one of these opposites for me is atmosphere versus story. All you need to make a film that's incredibly engaging is an excellent script with a great story and serviceable performances. They don't even have to be good. They just have to be serviceable. You don't need good cinematography. You don't need good art direction. You don't need good costumes. You don't need good sound design. You have to have professional sound, so it's not distracting. But it's really about that script. But for me, both my two feature films have very simple stories. The Witches has a very clear, simple story. The Lighthouse is almost void of story. It's almost the same scene over and over and over and over and over again with changing power dynamics. So in my films, like, you need atmosphere for the world to survive, for the film to survive. And the atmosphere, is an accumulation of details. And these details come from my research, they come from the weather, they come from the light, they come from the format that we shoot on. They come from all of these things. And an atmosphere, like in some ways, is a visual obstacle. And I mean that in a positive way. Emmanuel Lubezki, aka Chivo, obviously I couldn't admire him more. But he's very excited about shooting. This isn't writing, sorry. But he's very excited about shooting Alexa 65. And he has a quote kind of saying that in the history of cinema we've been looking at the world through dirty windows, and finally now, like, we can see the world clearly with Alexa 65 and the like technology. I like the dirty windows, like I like having to peer in through something that excites me. So we'll get further into, like, when I really start talking about period research, we'll get further into atmosphere and details and the research process. But I'd like to play the first clip. All the clips are a little long, so sorry.
Send thy Holy Spirit into me, which may assure me that thou art my Father and that I am thy child, and thou dost love me with an unchangeable love.
Caleb.
God give you good morrow. All are still abed. Save Mother.
'Tis no ease to rise on a grey day.
It's hard for me to watch The Witch because it doesn't always quite live up to my expectations. We had to shoot it digitally for financial reasons, and I'm glad that we did. But it does, like, the irony is I'm using that as an example of atmosphere, yet I find it to be quite naked. Dick Pope was talking about Mike Leigh's Peterloo, which I thought was a fine-looking digital film, and Dick Pope, like myself, finds it blasphemous to add film grain if you're shooting with the Alexa, but he added a bit more digital noise, and I wish that we had had that idea with The Witch. But in any case, that is an example of the kind of atmosphere that I'm trying to create, and all of the goat bleats and the dirty stockings and the rushes on the floor and all that stuff is very carefully, and the creaking ladder rungs is all very carefully described in the screenplay. Again, like that kind of detail in the screenplay might be laborious, but I feel like in my movies that are sometimes like thin on plot, like if you can't like get that atmosphere from the text, like we don't have any understanding of what I'm trying to do here. I very often describe the odors in my screenplays as well, in order so that we can better convey that feeling when we watch it. The other thing that's important potentially about this clip is it's kind of showing the audience my dollhouse. I think that it's not always important for the audience to know geography, but in this clip and in the next clip, the geography of their cottage was important, and so early on in the film we're establishing the atmosphere and the mood, and then we are showing the layout of the lay of the land, so to speak, and the same thing will happen with the next clip from the Lighthouse. But going back to like pragmatism. And maybe we'll talk about producer and studio notes at some point in the Q&A, because that's another interesting topic. But the film was supposed to start I don't know if everyone's like seen The Witch or not, but basically the film was supposed to start not much further back from that. My producers and financiers wanted me to start earlier, like with them leaving the village or the plantation that they came from, which I thought was ridiculous, and I didn't want to be doing like Little House on the Prairie, so I wrote a scene sort of that I thought would be too expensive that we couldn't shoot, and then everyone loved it, and then we had to find a way to like fit it into the budget, and I kept trying to cut it out of the movie, but actually they were right. We did need it. So sometimes studio notes are good. Okay, let's watch the next clip. He goes upstairs and he sees more, but we got to get on with the night. As far as the dollhouse goes. So that it was about 4 minutes, and that was 4 pages of writing, which it could easily have been a page. Like, boat comes, sees an island, get off the boat, they walk across the thing, they stand there, he goes in, he walks around, whatever, But again, it's this overwrought writing of every detail for 4 pages. But it also gives a better understanding of exactly what we're shooting, how long things are going to take, and it helps. I feel like it helps my collaborators understand like what we're doing. Even that long close-up of the 2 of them standing with the eye line towards camera was a very hefty paragraph about what we were supposed to convey from their faces in that moment. So let's get into something that's actually interesting. Researching the period is my whole thing. There's nothing better about being period accurate, but it's something that really excites me. And if there is anything, I said that my interest in ghost stories and fairy tales and whatever perhaps is unique about me, but if there is anything unique about my films, it's perhaps like my obsession with being accurate. Of course, Bram Stoker's Dracula and Peter Brook's King Lear are fantastic examples of films that aren't period accurate in any way, shape, or form, but take you into incredibly rich, transportive, believable worlds. I guess Dracula is kind of stylized, but it's great. And for me, I like I like it when I don't understand these people. I like it when I'm researching Puritans and I think, how could this kind of English Calvinism be hopeful for anyone? And then be reading and reading and reading, struggling like this. These are alien thoughts. These are alien people. And finally, reading John Winthrop's letters to his wife back home in England, and that they were like praying at the same time. They didn't know about time zones, but they thought they were praying at the same time, and things like that. All of a sudden, you see, okay, they're human like me, and finally, you can unlock this door where you realize, like, oh my goodness, like if I was alive then, I would have thought exactly like them. Of course, I would have. And not only that, like I can see how that kind of thinking still resonates in culture today. That for me is the most exciting moment. And that requires a lot of reading, and then in the creation of the physical world, which also begins in the script phase. I'm also looking at like tons of visual imagery to understand all this stuff, because again, the atmosphere is an accumulation of details, and if I were to be creating a fictional world, perhaps if I was like J.R.R. Tolkien and was that kind of genius and had that kind of time on my hands, I could create something that specific. But generally, it's not going to be as specific as the real thing. So if I'm just taking research and saying, this is exactly what it is, team, let's recreate it to the best of our ability, we have a huge amount of detail, more detail than we could have if we had conjured it up ourselves. At least that's my thinking. And so, you read secondary sources, you read primary sources, you read children's books on it to get like another base overview after you've already gone deep. You watch crappy YouTube videos, you go into museums, you consult with historians, you do whatever needs to be done to find out as much as you possibly can. With the Lighthouse, for example, it's all built on research. So my brother said a ghost story in a lighthouse. That was inspired imagery. Then on day 2 of researching, I read about Small's lighthouse tragedy. 2 guys, both named Thomas, one older, one younger. They get marooned on their lighthouse station because of a storm. The old one dies, the young one goes mad. That's my story. That's that's the base of my story. And then the lighthouse keepers, the instruction to lighthouse keepers, the manual, that becomes a huge key. All the tasks that they're doing and the rules that they're not supposed to break, that becomes inspiration for all kinds of scenes. And then the photographs of 19th century lighthouse stations tell you a whole lot. Not just about my dollhouse, but more. You see the boathouse with runners and a lifeboat in it. Well, I guess at some point, Rob Pattinson's going to try to escape and pull that lifeboat out, and so all that stuff is incredibly helpful. And then we continue to amplify our knowledge in these different areas. I'm saying we because I wrote this with my brother. And in considering Melville, which you would if you were writing a New England 19th century maritime story, you start getting into classical mythology. When you start getting into classical mythology, you start thinking about symbolist painting from the period. And so Sascha Schneider and Jean Delville, who are doing like mythic paintings in a homoerotic style, become perfect candidates as imagery that's going to work itself into the script. In writing period dialogue, it's the same kind of rigor. With The Witch, I felt that, I don't know if I agree with this conceit today, but I felt that because the Puritans were so, to use the word again, rigorous in their beliefs, so devout, that I felt I needed to use their own words to be respectful to them. I don't know if that I agree with that now, and I think it might have been disrespectful to use their own words, but that's what I did. Luckily, because it's early modern English, that's the period of Milton and Shakespeare and Spenser. So there's many books about and thesauruses with the vocabulary and the rules, which was incredibly helpful. But I also read tons and tons and tons and tons of primary source material and made my own thesaurus that wasn't a one-to-one, but sort of like a vibe. So things you might say when you're chastising your children, things you might say when you think your daughter's a witch, things you might say to your goat, and so you kind of are pulling from all these different things. And some of the dialogue early on became a bit of a collage that then I need to like hone into the separate voices for different characters and make it much more specific and mine. But there were certain things that the children said when they were possessed are things that children supposedly said when they were possessed, and that was, at the time I wrote this, important to me. But very often in my research, something would inspire a scene. So John Winthrop, the first governor of Massachusetts, who I mentioned earlier, he had a very personal religious diary that was a real treasure trove for me. And he wrote that he dreamed, quote, that I was with Christ upon the earth, and that very instant with him in many tears for the assurance of the pardon of my sins, etc. I was so ravished with his love towards me, far exceeding the affection of the kindest husband, that being awakened, it had made so deep an impression in my heart as I was forced to unmeasurable weeping for a great while and had a more lively feeling of love than ever before. So in this next clip, I take that, it inspired a scene with the mother and the witch, and she uses half of that and she uses it to a different end. The other dialogue in the scene with her and her husband is very much a fight that I might have with my wife or a fight that my parents might have had, only in early modern English. And I apologize if Kate Dickey's Scottish-tinged Yorkshire accent is a bit tricky to understand, but at least I'm in the UK and not the States. Let's do it.
Just remember John Kemp's son. That first winter he was tormented of Indian magic.
This is not the same.
This is unnatural providence.
I know not that.
Look at my son. Will.
What?
Think.
Think what?
Think.
I have I've no thoughts.
Does this not look like witchcraft?
What witch? Who does this then? Who? I thought her as a child.
What are you doing?
We're back to the plantation in the morning. Find a good family for Thomasin. We'll take Caleb to the doctors. He'll tell if this be some natural ill or not. Yet we cannot return as beggars. I'll scour the field. There must be some fruit yet untouched by this rot. I beseech thee, Catherine, what canst thou do for him presently?
How might we all bear it to the village with no horse?
Well, the little corn and the goat should fetch a fair price. We'll back with Caleb and sell them, return with a horse for the twins and Thomasin.
You cannot leave them here.
Well, Thomasin indeed.
Oh, forget the crop, Will.
What? What dost thou want, Catherine? Tell me, and I will give it thee.
I want to be home.
Thou shalt be home by candle time tomorrow.
In England. Oh, Will. I also have a confession to make. I never meant to be a shrew to thee. I have become as Job's wife, I know it. Since Sam, my heart's turned to stone. I had a dream once. It was when I was of Thomasin's years. That I was with Christ upon earth. Oh, I was so very near him. And in many tears for the assurance of the pardon of my sins. And I was so ravished with his love towards me. I thought it far exceeded the affection of the kindest husband. And since Samuel disappeared, I have such a sad weakness of faith, I cannot shake it. I cannot see Christ's help is near. I pray and I pray, but I cannot. I fear I cannot ever feel that same measure of love again.
Thou shalt have of it in heaven. Bobby and Field, if you can spare a while, do. We'll leave at dawn. I promise you that.
I do like the performances, Alexa or not. But yeah, so there's an example of that. In the Lighthouse, my brother and I did not, very, very rarely used intact sentences. We were studying all kinds of things to create two different forgotten New England dialects from the end of the 19th century. I mentioned Melville. Stevenson is not from New England, but certainly with some of the maritime stuff, we felt he could come in handy, and Coleridge too, all the usual culprits. But then, of course, we turn to lighthouse keepers' journals and diaries, and that was very fruitful for Robert Pattinson's character as a former lumberjack. I found a treasure trove of interviews with former lumberjacks from that period. But who became the most helpful was a writer named Sarah Orne Jewett, and she was writing in the state of Maine in our period, and she was very concerned or interested in dialect herself, and so she would be interviewing sailors and sea captains and farmers, and then writing her main stories in phonetic dialect. So that was the key. Defoe has a couple sentences, like when he's wistfully thinking about the past, that come from Jewett. But other than that, my brother and I were working with all this source material and various slang dictionaries, 19th century slang dictionaries separated into region and nautical dictionaries and lexicons to really create something or our best version to recreate something. And my wife found a dissertation by a woman named Evelyn Starr Cutler, who, and her dissertation was on dialect in Jewett. And thank you, Evelyn, because she provided rules. And we had those. I had those rules when I was writing The Witch. But who, if not for Evelyn, would have provided rules for how to working class people in the Northeast of America would have spoken. So she was able to break it down and talk about what words are omitted and where there's rhotic displacement and so on and so forth. So we could make sure that these 12 things were always consistent with Rob's character and these 10 with Willem's or whatever. And it was very important, you know, when we got to her. But from the beginning, we were writing in dialect before we totally were fluent in it, because we were trying to get our minds to think differently, as if you would write in another language. So this next clip, it begins with quite naturalistic dialogue, or our attempt at it, based on our research. But then Defoe goes into a kind of rant that I think is a bit theatrical. I think that, you know, the influences of Sam Shepard and Pinter and, like, dare I say out loud, Beckett show themselves to be clear, because even the rantiest ranter might not go on for this long. But it was fun.
What do you call that?
Sir?
What?
I mopped and swept twice over,
You
sir.
lying dog.
I swept them.
Tis begrimed and bedabbled. Unwiped, unwashed, and disdained.
Get some kind of pert out of molesting me.
Come now.
I already says...
How dare ye contradict me, you dog?
Now look here. I ain't never intended to be no housewife nor slave in taking this job. And it ain't right. These lodgings is more ramshackle than any shanty boys camp I ever seen. The Queen of England's old fancy housekeeper couldn't even done no better than what I done. Because I tell you, I scrubbed this here place twice over.
And I say you did nothing of the sort. And I say you swab it again, and you swab it proper like this time, and you'll be swabbing it 10 times more after that. And if I tells you to pull up and apart every floorboard and clapboard of this here house and scour 'em down with your bare bleeding knuckles, you'll do it. And if I tells you to yank out every single nail from every mouldering nail hole and suck off every speck of rust till all them nails sparkle like a sperm whale's pecker, and then carpenter the whole light station back together from scrap and then do it all over again, you'll do it! And by God and by golly, you'll do it, smiling lad, 'cause you like it. You like it 'cause I says you will. Contradict me again, and I'll dock your wages. You hear me, lad?
Aye, sir.
Now, swab, dog. Swab.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's mythic, but it's not naturalistic either. You know, one thing that I just didn't mention with the research, looking over my notes here, is just is the other thing is you're always learning more, and I'm writing in tandem, so I can research some stuff, write some stuff, research some stuff, write some stuff the whole time, and you're constantly revising as you find more clarity on what the world is. The Viking script. There was a tremendous amount of research that I did. My co-writer there is Icelandic and like really knows a lot about Vikings. But we have consulted with 3 of the greatest Viking historians recently, and we missed some stuff. you know, and that means that it's tricky because there's some things that you can say, okay, like we'll fix this, but then it's like, you know, we've made this sandcastle and we have this glorious tower that we're really proud of, and we have to smash it now. It's horrifying, but sometimes you just have to like suck it up and smash it and rebuild it better. So in conclusion, that was a bit scattered, but hopefully during the Q&A, we can find a way to tie this all up in a bow. Or maybe I'm exposing myself as someone who's more interested in atmosphere than story through this lecture. Okay.